Blood ends a fight, but only silence ends a system. The first shot of the final night wasn't aimed at the Courier. It was aimed at the sky. A flare burst over the valley, white fire and screaming sparks, and every door in town slammed shut at once like the whole place had learned to breathe on command. Wren grabbed the Courier's sleeve hard enough to bruise. "That's the beacon," she whispered. "That's not a warning. That's a summon." On the far ridge, a light blinked once, then twice, then once. And in the silence between those blinks, men started moving, boots, hooves, chains, like the dark itself had been given orders. The Courier didn't look for a sheriff. He didn't look for help. He looked at the hill where the freed tower stood and felt the worst truth settle into his ribs. They weren't here to collect him, and they were here to erase the town for sheltering him. A scream cut through the street. Someone had tried to run. A rifle cracked. The scream stopped. The Courier's jaw locked. Iron flooded his mouth like he'd bitten his own tongue. Wren's voice shook, angry and terrified. "If that light keeps blinking, they'll keep coming, all night, until there's nothing left." The Courier drew his revolver, not to fight the town, to leave it. He turned to Wren, eyes dead steady. "Where's the central beacon?" he asked. Wren stared at him like he'd just asked for the mouth of hell. Then she answered anyway. "Into the Mesa," she said. "And once we go, we don't come back." The Courier nodded once. "Good," he said, and he rode toward the light that was ordering the dark. The first collectors hit the town edge like a tide. They didn't ride in screaming. They rode in quiet, spreading, sealing streets, the way a hand closes around a throat. The Courier cut through alleys, not to hide, but to avoid dragging the fight through sleeping doors. He knew what the beacon wanted: panic, fire, a story that made people beg for control again. He refused to give it that story. Two riders appeared ahead, blocking the lane between a butcher shop and a church wall. Their rifles were leveled, their faces blank. Wren whispered, "If we shoot them, the town hears." The Courier's answer was a movement. He fired once, not at a body, at the church bell rope. The bullet snapped the rope. The bell dropped and slammed the tower frame with a metallic shriek. The sound was wrong enough to make the rifleman flinch. That half-beat was all the Courier ever needed. He pulled Wren behind a wagon, rolled under the axle. They came up on the far side and fired into the dirt beside a horse's front hoof. The horse reared, the rider swore, the lane cracked open. They slipped through it like a blade through cloth. Behind them, the beacon blinked again. Once, twice, once. And the collectors moved as one, adjusting, funneling the town inward toward the main street, toward the places where bodies would stack and fear would last. The Courier felt it and made another decision. He wasn't going to win a battle in this town. He was going to end the reason battles kept arriving. They hit the scrub line at the edge of town and rode hard into the dry cut. Wind clawed at their coats. The Mesa rose ahead, black against a starless sky, the beacon eye faintly glowing on top like a cold moon trapped in glass. Wren breathed. "They'll track us." "They already are," the Courier said. And as if the night wanted to prove him right, a shot cracked off rock behind them. A bullet whined past and vanished into darkness. Wren didn't look back. "Bridge or tunnel?" she asked. The Courier saw it as the Mesa approached, a narrow chain bridge spanning a gap like a grin, and lower down a seam in the rock that looked like nothing unless you were taught to see it. "Bridge is a throat," he said. "Tunnel is a coffin." Wren's mouth tightened. "So what do we do?" The Courier's eyes narrowed at the beacon. "We make the throat swallow its own teeth," he replied. They dismounted in a wash and led the horses through dead brush until they could see the bridge supports. The bridge had watchers, 2 silhouettes with rifles, 1 lantern shielded so its glow wouldn't carry too far. Disciplined, patient. But Wren crouched beside the courier. "If we can't kill the man who runs it, what do we do up there?" The courier looked at her. "We kill his voice," he said, "and we kill his light." Wren swallowed. "You said a system dies in silence." "That's what tonight is," the courier replied. "Silence or ash." He slid forward alone, low, using the rock shadow as cover until he reached a cluster of old supply crates half buried in sand. He pried one open and found what he needed, not money, not paper, just practical things. A coil of thin chain, a broken pulley, a tin of oil that smelled like a blacksmith's shop. Wren watched him work. "What are you building?" "A lie," he said. He looped the chain around the bridge's lower support cable, just loose enough to slip, and fixed the pulley to a rock anchor that wouldn't move. And then he ran the chain line back into the wash, where he could pull it without being seen. He held the oil tin up to Wren. "When it starts, you run for the seam," he said. "You find the tunnel. You get inside. When you reach the mirror room, you tilt the eye off true and jam it." Wren's eyes locked on him. "And you?" The courier's gaze stayed on the bridge. "I keep them looking at the bridge," he said. Wren's voice went tight. "That's suicide." The courier's face didn't soften. "No," he said. "Suicide is letting the beacon keep blinking." He rose where the watchers could see him. He didn't run. He walked toward the bridge like he'd come to surrender. A rifle lifted. A voice called. Controlled. Certain. "Stop." The courier stopped at the first plank. He raised his hands. Above, inside the beacon chamber, a speaking horn carried a voice down the cliffside. Not smooth, not polite. It was flat, like a ledger read aloud without ink. "Courier," it said. Wren stiffened behind cover. "That's him," she breathed. "The Executor." The courier looked up toward the glass eye. "You finally came where people can see you," he called back. The Executor's voice didn't change. "People see what they're told," it replied. "Step onto the bridge." The courier didn't move. "Blink for them," he shouted. "Tell them who to kill." The beacon blinked once, then twice, then once. And the watchers on the bridge shifted their rifles a fraction to match the order, like dogs turning toward a whistle. The courier smiled, just a little, because he wanted the Executor to think he was proud. Then he did the one thing the system hated. He refused the script, and he took one step backward. The watchers hesitated. Confusion flickered. The Executor's voice sharpened by a hair. "Advance." Boots moved. The courier pulled a tin whistle from his pocket, the same kind runners used when they needed men to move fast. He blew one sharp note. Not the beacon's pattern, not a town's call, just a human interruption. The watchers jerked their heads instinctively, trained reflex snapping toward sound. That reflex was the crack in the armor. The courier yanked the chain line in the wash with all his weight. The chain slipped into place around the bridge support cable, the pulley snapped tight, and the bridge shuddered like something alive had been kicked awake. The watchers on the planks flinched. The courier fired once into the bridge's lantern bracket. The lantern fell, glass breaking, flame hissing out. A darkness swallowed the planks. Then the bridge cable screamed, not breaking, releasing tension. The bridge dropped 2 feet in a sudden, violent sag, a planned collapse that didn't sever it, but made it buck and swing like a beast. One watcher lost footing. He grabbed the railing. The courier didn't shoot him. He fired at the railing post behind the man's hand. Wood exploded, the man's grip failed, and he went over the edge into the ravine, vanishing with a long, stunned scream that cut off on stone. Wren's breath caught. The courier didn't look down. He used the chaos. He sprinted toward the Mesa seam as bullets cracked from above and rocks sparked. He slid into shadow, grabbed Wren's wrist, and shoved her toward the tunnel entrance. "Go," he said. Wren hesitated just long enough to hate him for being right, and then she vanished into the seam like a ghost pulled into a grave. The courier stayed outside another 3 seconds, not because he liked danger, because he needed the system's eyes on the wrong place. He fired twice, not to kill, to herd. First shot took a chunk out of a rock face, sending a cascade of gravel that made the left flank duck. Second shot snapped a rope line holding a supply tarp, dropping canvas over a rifle barrel. Then he dove into the seam and disappeared into darkness. The tunnel swallowed sound. Dust coated the tongue. The air smelled of oil and old stone, like a place that had been built to hide motion for a long time. Behind him, the collectors poured into the entrance. The courier didn't run straight. He ran crooked. At the first junction, he kicked loose a stacked bundle of boards, wedging the passage like a cork. While at the second junction, he dragged a torn oilcloth across the floor and smeared it with sand to hide footprints. At the third junction, he stopped. Wren looked back at him, eyes wide. "Why are you stopping?" The courier listened. Footsteps, close. He raised his revolver and fired once into the ceiling. Rock dust rained down. The pursuing collector flinched, threw an arm up, and that flinch turned his body sideways. Wren slammed him with the butt of a stolen pistol and took his keys without asking permission. The courier didn't thank her. He kept moving. They climbed a final incline and emerged into a maintenance corridor behind the beacon chamber. The air changed immediately. Warmer, sharper, electric with tension. Ahead was the glass eye room, and inside it the truth moved like clockwork. The beacon wasn't powered by steam or magic, and it was powered by men. A prisoner was strapped into a harness, hands wrapped in cloth, turning a heavy crank that rotated the mirror rig in precise increments. His shoulders shook with exhaustion. Blood seeped through the cloth. A collector stood over him with a stick and a stopwatch. When the crank slowed, the stick came down. Another prisoner waited behind, already bound, already prepared to become the next heartbeat. Wren's face hardened into something cold. "It runs on people," she whispered. The courier swallowed. "Then we stop the run," he said. He didn't fire into the room. He watched. He counted. He saw the rhythm in the collector's posture. When the crank hit a notch, the collector glanced at the stopwatch. Every time. A habit. Habits were how systems died. The courier nodded to Wren. "On the notch," he breathed. Wren understood without words. She flicked a pebble into the lens rack. Glass clinked. Both collectors in the room turned their heads toward the sound. The courier surged. He didn't go for the gun. He went for the stopwatch. He slammed into the main guard, drove him back into the corridor, and punched the man's throat hard enough to steal his breath. The guard tried to shout. The courier struck again, not killing, just breaking the man's ability to command. Wren snatched the keys and slid into the room like a runner returning to a crime scene. The prisoner in the harness met her eyes. Not begging, warning. Because the other collector had already recovered, hand moving toward the speaking horn mount. Wren kicked the man's wrist, knocked his hand away, and drove her elbow into his jaw. He fell hard. The courier stepped into the room and felt the beacon's presence like pressure in his ears. Above them, the mirror rig turned with slow inevitability, catching moonlight and throwing it outward in controlled pulses. The beacon blinked once. Twice. Once. The executor's voice came through a speaking horn, calm, close, and absolutely sure. "You made it inside," it said. "Good. Now you can die where your noise ends." The courier looked up at the horn. "Come down," he called. The executor didn't answer that. He answered with something worse. A door on the far side opened, and 3 bound prisoners were dragged into view on a narrow platform over the ravine. The collectors held them by ropes tied around their waists, like freight. The executor's voice stayed flat. "Shoot me," it said. "They fall." Wren froze, eyes blazing, and the courier's hand tightened on his revolver. This was the system's favorite shape of power, not a gun, a choice. The executor continued almost gently. "You wanted an ending," it said. "End it. Pay for it." The courier's jaw clenched. He could feel the moral weight of it, the way he'd felt it on the tower when he pushed a man over the rail and told himself it was necessary. He looked at the bound prisoners, faces bruised, eyes terrified. He heard Elias's voice in his head without hearing it. "Don't let them write your story for you." The courier lowered his gun an inch. Wren whispered, "If you shoot him—" "I know," the courier said. Then he did the third thing again. He refused the script. He raised his gun and fired at the clamp holding the rope release mechanism. Metal shattered. The clamp snapped loose and whipped across the platform, tangling one collector's legs. In the same instant, Wren threw the mirror lever hard, yanking the beacon eye off alignment. The light blinked a nonsense pattern, rapid and wrong, like a dying heartbeat. Outside, in the valley, collectors waiting for clean orders received madness. Some advanced, some retreated, some fired into shadows where they thought the command had pointed. Gunfire erupted below, chaotic and brutal, the machine biting its own tongue. Inside the chamber, the rope-tangled collector stumbled. The courier lunged and slammed him into the railing, pinning him. Wren sprinted to the platform and cut one prisoner's gag. "Run when I say," she hissed. The prisoners stared at her like they'd forgotten what running felt like. The executor's voice sharpened. "Stop!" The courier turned toward the horn. "No," he said, a voice low and deadly. "You stop." He fired once into the speaking horn mount. Brass exploded. The horn crumpled and fell, tearing the last clean voice from the beacon. For the first time, the executor's calm cracked. Not in volume, in timing. He was suddenly a half-second late. A human delay. The courier felt it like blood in water. The executor stepped into view at last, not on the valley floor, but behind a glass partition on an upper walkway, gun already raised. He wasn't dressed like a mayor or a marshal. He was dressed like a man who didn't need the dust to touch him. He fired. The bullet slammed into the courier's shoulder, punching him sideways into the lens rack. Glass exploded. Pain flared hot enough to white out the world for a heartbeat. Wren screamed his roll into the air without speaking his name. The courier's revolver nearly slipped from his numb fingers. He caught it. Blood soaked his sleeve. He breathed once. It hurt. He breathed again anyway. The executor watched him like a man watching math resolve. "You're bleeding," he said. "This ends now." The courier laughed once, ugly and bitter. "You're not the first man to shoot me," he rasped. "You're just the first one who did it from behind glass." The executor stepped closer, gun steady. "You want silence?" the executor said. "Silence is easy. I'll give it to you." He aimed at the courier's head. The courier didn't try to outdraw him again. He did something smarter. He looked past the executor at the beacon's spine, the main gear housing, the counterweight hanging over the ravine, the iron support that held the mirror rig's alignment. The courier raised his gun and fired into the gear housing. Metal shrieked, teeth jumped, the counterweight slipped. Wren's eyes widened. "No!" she breathed. The mirror rig lurched like an animal waking furious. The counterweight dropped. The whole beacon assembly tore free from its bracket and swung sideways in a violent arc. It slammed into the glass wall. Glass exploded outward like rain. Wind howled in, ripping paper-thin cloth from prisoners' wrists, snatching breath from every mouth. The beacon blinked once, then died. Outside, in the valley, Collectors froze mid-motion like puppets whose strings had been cut. Some stared around like waking from a trance. Some ran. Some kept shooting because habit didn't know what to do without an order. The system, without a voice, began to collapse into mere men. The Executor stumbled for the first time, not from injury, from loss. He looked at the dead light, and fear crossed his face like a shadow. Not fear of death, fear of being unable to command it. The Courier pushed off the rack and forced himself forward, shoulders screaming, vision tunneling. The Executor raised his gun again. Wren moved first. She hurled a heavy lens frame at the Executor's wrist. The gun jerked. The shot went wide, splintering a beam. The Courier closed the distance and drove his revolver barrel into the Executor's throat, slamming him against the railing. The Executor choked, eyes wide with something that looked almost like disbelief. The Courier leaned close, voice low enough that only the Executor could hear. "You were right," the Courier whispered. "Stations can be rebuilt." His eyes hardened. "But you won't be." He fired once. The Executor's body jerked, then went limp. The Courier held him for half a second, feeling the weight of the end. Then he let him fall. The Executor toppled over the railing and vanished into the ravine below, swallowed by rock and wind. For a moment, there was only the sound of the broken beacon structure creaking in the gale and the prisoners breathing like they couldn't believe air was free again. Wren grabbed the Courier's arm. "Stay with me!" she hissed. The Courier's knees buckled. He didn't want to fall. He forced himself upright anyway. "Get them out!" he rasped. Wren cut ropes fast, hands steady despite the tremor in her jaw. The prisoners stumbled, then ran, scrambling into the maintenance corridor, into the tunnel, into whatever life was left that didn't require turning a crank until your hands bled. The Courier staggered to the chamber edge and looked out at the valley. No blinking, no answering light, just darkness, normal darkness, the kind that belonged to coyotes and wind and distance, not orders. Wren returned, supporting him. "It's done," she said. The Courier swallowed, blood slick in his throat. "Is it?" he whispered. Below, collectors were scattering without formation. Some tossed rifles and ran. Some tried to keep order and got tackled by the freed, furious men they'd treated like fuel. The Courier watched it and felt something unfamiliar. Not victory. Relief, mixed with dread. Because relief always came right before the next thing tried to take it back. They made it down the tunnel before the beacon chamber collapsed further. The rig groaned above like it was dying slowly. Wind rushed through broken glass and sounded almost like laughter. At the seam entrance, dawn began to bruise the horizon. Wren helped the Courier into the scrub and half-carried him toward their horses. They rode away from Central Beacon as smoke and dust rose behind them like a funeral that didn't know what it was burying. For miles, there was no light behind them, no blink, no signal. The Courier's breathing steadied. His shoulder throbbed. Every pulse was a reminder of what it cost to end a man who believed he was untouchable. Wren finally spoke, voice ragged. "You ended him!" The Courier stared at the horizon. "I ended his mouth," he said. Wren frowned. "That's the same thing." The Courier didn't answer right away, because the West had taught him the cruelest lesson. The West didn't run out of mouths. It just found new ones. Then, just as the sun's first edge lifted, a faint flicker appeared far off on the horizon. Not from Central Beacon, farther, smaller, a different angle. One blink, then nothing. Wren stopped breathing for a heartbeat. The Courier felt his stomach drop through the bottom of his ribs. Wren whispered, "That's not possible?" The Courier's voice went quiet, colder than the morning wind. "It's possible," he said. "It's just worse." Wren turned to him, eyes blazing with fury and fear. "What does it mean?" The courier looked at his blood-soaked sleeve, then back at the horizon. "It means we didn't end a system," he said. He swallowed, throat burning. "We ended one station." He nudged his horse forward, because stopping was how you died after believing you'd won. Wren rode beside him, jaw set, eyes fixed on the distance. And the west, for a moment, there was quiet enough to hear the truth. Blood ends a fight, but silence ends a system. And somewhere out there, another light had just learned it needed to blink quieter. Here's the question for you listening right now. If the horizon blinks back after you've killed the man who pulled the strings, do you chase the next light? Or do you pretend you never saw it?